The Secret Science at Work by Max Freedom Long. Chapter 19. Clearing the Slightly Blocked Path. In our experimental work of trying to discover what was blocking the path of the individual in prayer, we always started with a careful check to see if it was a matter of habits of thought and deeply prejudiced beliefs which the low self was reluctant to change. That is something which a man or woman can find out working alone, if he or she will examine such beliefs honestly. All blockings are certainly not as difficult to expose as the outlaw memories and the complexes. In making the Huna type prayer, the usual blocking reported was that no emotion of any kind was felt at the moment that the high self should have been contacted. We well know from our study of the beliefs of the Kahunas that where there is no faintest shade of emotion, enthusiasm, desire, fear, or love, no emotional reaction of any kind, the low self is not doing its part in the work. We had to remind ourselves that when the low self gets to work, it produces emotions of one sort or another. It is this upwelling of emotion which we customarily think of as coming from our conscious mind or middle self entities. We say silently to ourselves, "I like this," or "I like to do this." Or we may say, "I do not like to do that." All likes and dislikes are tinged with emotions. Otherwise, they are automatic actions to a large extent, and this emotion has its origin in the low self. Attention may be classed with the emotions. If the low self is interested, it will like a thing that is to be done, or perhaps be sufficiently impressed by its importance that even if it is a very unpleasant and difficult task which must be performed, it will pay strict attention and do its best to help perform the task from beginning to end. It is hard to define the sensations which come from the low self when it is in action and is doing its full share of the work in any undertaking. In games, it is enthusiasm, enjoyment, and attention intermixed. There may also be an admixture of the competitive spirit or of the will to hunt and capture, or to defend successfully against the attack of others. When the blank wall is faced, as one tries to pray, it is the complete lack of any emotion. However, there were reported by different HRAs certain slight sensations which were clues to the low self attitude. A vague fear for one, a sudden emotion or aversion for another. Many times, a conviction with the whole thing was something that won't work in quotes. In some cases, it was not a sensation so much as an inability to keep the attention of the low self fixed upon what was wanted of it. The attention seems to slip, and in a moment, other thoughts were pushed into the mind, such as urgent recollection of daily chores or things which should be done, which it would be pleasant to do. The excuses presented by the low self for not doing its work were endless. Sudden impulses to call up friends might come, or worry would start from fear that something was wrong in the kitchen or in the outer office. One HRA found that when he tried to get his low self to contact the high self, he would almost invariably begin to itch furiously, so that his mind was entirely distracted. The low self proved to be a most ingenious and evasive self. The HRAs tried many different experiments in their efforts to get to the bottom of the trouble and to find out why the low self was reluctant to cooperate. It was found that the simplest method was to talk it over with the low self by way of a pendulum. Those who had taken time to get well acquainted with their low self were able to get the most illuminating information by asking simple questions which could be answered by yes or no of the pendulum, or by the diagonal, doubtful, or other movements which had been agreed upon as having certain meanings. The main trouble turned out to be the fact that some quite characteristic belief on the part of the illogical low self was blocking its desire or its will to help make the prayer. One HRA, after much questioning, got to the heart of her difficulty in praying for healing of a certain condition from which she had been suffering by discovering that her low self did not wish to make the prayer with her because it thought it was useless. The reason for this conviction was found to be that many times prayers had been made in the ordinary way and nothing had come of them. Such faith as the middle self had come to have in the Huna method of prayer was rendered useless by the stubborn low self. Fortunately, the low self can be won over by arguments and reasoning if there is no major fixation which blocks the path. In this case, the HRA found that by going back to childhood training and faith in God, the careful reproach to the matter of prayer could be made, and the lack of faith cleared away. The report to me was in a simple, easy, and very personal conversational form, which I repeat here. You still believe in God, don't you? Low self answers by way of pendulum, yes. That is good. Then you also believe that God can answer prayers, do you? Yes. Several instances of answered prayers were recalled. Do you remember how glad and thankful you were for these things? Yes. Do you believe that we should pray to God through our own high self? No. You know we have a high self, do you? Yes. But you think we should pray to God direct? Yes. Is that because we were taught when we were little? Yes. Do you believe that we must pray through Jesus to reach God? Yes. Do you feel God when you pray? No. Do you feel it when you pray through Jesus? Yes. You contact the high self often, do you? Yes. Can you tell the difference between contacting Jesus and your high self? Doubtful. Of course you can't. All prayers go to the Christ within that you were taught to believe in, and that is the high self. Do you understand that? Doubtful. Then I'll explain it to you. Listen carefully. And there followed a careful and forceful presentation of the fact that the high self is the Christ within for each of us, and that it alone can take the prayers to God if that is necessary. Now, do you understand that we must contact the high self and give it our thought forms or pictures of the things for which we pray? Yes. Then you are ready now to contact your high self. Send mana to it along the Aka cord of connection, and send with the mana the pictures of the things we wish to pray for. No. Is that because you think we are praying for the wrong things? Yes. Do you think we are asking too much? Yes. Would you pray for your daily bread? Yes. Would you pray for jam on your bread? Doubtful. Do you think you don't deserve jam? Yes. Do you think we deserve healing? No. Is this because you think one should pray only for wisdom, seek first the kingdom of heaven, and expect all other things to be added unto us? Yes. Do you believe that because we were taught that way when we were young? Yes. Do you think it is wrong to tell our prayers that what kind of things we'd like to have added to the gift of wisdom and spiritual grace? Yes. I see. You still hold to the old habit of thinking formed in your childhood. There is a new and better way to pray, and I thought you had paid attention and had understood it. Now tell me, wouldn't you like to have jam on your bread? Yes. Do you believe that God can give us jam as well as bread? Yes. But you said you don't deserve jam. Well, do you feel we are so wicked we deserve only punishment? Doubtful. Do you think being sick is the punishment we deserve? Doubtful. Do you want me to stop eating, just fast and pray all the time until we die? No. Do you want us all to get so sick we die? No. Do you believe that God has only love for us? Doubtful. Do you believe that God is love? Yes. I see. You still go back to the things we learned when we were little. Now, listen to me and pay strict attention while we go over everything, and I give you the truth of the matter and explain what we've been learning here of late. There followed careful explanations. This will illustrate the type of questioning used when habits of thought and inclination of the low self cause the blockings. Often the questioning and lecturing and re-questioning will have to be continued for a number of sessions before the troubles are unearthed and the low self won over to the new beliefs. In the above case, the effort was entirely successful. The prayers were finally correctly made, and they were answered. Among other things which HRAs found by communicating with their low selves as to why they did not help with the prayer making were as follows. Number 1, the feeling that unless one prayed for others and helped them to get needed things, one did not deserve being helped. Number 2, a feeling of fear of God and high self, usually caused by a feeling of guilt, unworthiness, or shame. This fear might have been formed in childhood and have become a habit of thought and reaction. Number 3, refusal to help with a prayer was found in one case to be caused by a deep dislike of certain ultra-pious relative who had forced religious observances on the HRA in question in early life. Number 4, a feeling of vague general fear and anxiety becoming strong when the needs and lacks and tangles in social conditions were sharply pointed up by the assembling of the prayer. Because of these inner worries, the quiet and solemnized condition needed for making the complete prayer was almost impossible to attain. Number 5, inertia or laziness on the part of the low self. It did not want to make the effort to help the middle self in its desires. This state was, in one case, a complete lack of interest in life. In 2 other cases, the trouble was caused by memories of former experiences in which failure had come after long and strenuous efforts to succeed in some way or with some person in correcting social tangles or relationships. Desire had to be aroused once more with an element of ambition and sufficient renewal of confidence and faith in the high self and God to go ahead and make fresh tries. In one instance, the low self seemed unwilling to make the prayer because it would entail a subsequent effort to start the ball rolling in the direction and bring about an answer to the prayer. In other words, the low self felt that the thing desired was not worth asking for. Not worth working for, Number 6, a feeling that old hates and grudges were better to hold than to give up in order to clear the path and get the prayer made. Number 7, a feeling that to pray and get healed will cause the loss of loving care and solicitude on the part of other members of the family and force the individual to shoulder responsibilities happily evaded by illness. The part played by habits of thoughts and belief proved to be much greater than was expected. The low self was found in almost all cases to be in need of a rather complete working over to break down and correct old belief habits, those beyond which the middle self had progressed. In correcting dogmatic religious beliefs of an earlier life, let me start the sentence again. In correcting dogmatic religious beliefs of earlier life, it was found that the low self places great reliance on the printed word. As in learning things at school, repetition, more repetition, and constant review and drill helped replace old ideas that blocked the work. The reading and rereading of the parts of The Secret Science Behind Miracles or of the HRA bulletins, which clearly explained and made logical sense of the Huna concepts, these were invaluable, as well as of other material covering similar ways of thinking and believing. Especially convincing were the repeated readings of explanations of the Huna meanings in parts of the Bible. This because the low self had once been grounded in its belief that the Bible was to be accepted without question. Such readings of the ancient secret lore as found in the Bible were also of great value in helping the middle self to come to an understanding of what is real and genuine and what was added dogma, for there is much of Huna in the Bible. The rule to be followed was that only the actual words of Jesus were to be trusted in the New Testament. After his death, a mass of dogmatic theology was invented and added, as were rites and doctrines, which, like many misconceptions surrounding the earlier ideas of blood sacrifice, were evidently inaugurated to impress the people and to make the readings work better. That they seem to be needed can be laid to the fact that the Huna teachings and the initiations to pass on the teachings were either stopped or were too difficult for the masses to accept, even if there were those able to give them. Almost any person who has been brought up in Christian circles will find in himself dogmatic beliefs which are held by his low self long after the middle self has renounced them. Many have found that their low selves become filled with fear at the thought of questioning the commonly accepted dogmas of their religion. This can amount to superstition. Old and invalid beliefs have usually been far easier to change by explaining the true meaning behind them than by any effort at flat contradiction. If the middle self is convinced, it must in turn teach the low self as carefully as if requiring it to relearn a long poem, which, wrongly written, had to be unlearned in many lines in order to relearn it, as it should have been in the first place. It was observed that some people who were never able to go forward in the prayer work seemed to be blocked by selfishness and greed or intolerance, which they did not acknowledge. Such things could not be called to their attention without offending them deeply. Such an attitude sometimes was shown unexpectedly by a chance remark such as, "Why should we be taxed so that other people who have never saved a cent can retire on a fat pension, when they should jolly well be made to keep working instead of lying around twiddling their thumbs. Another revealing remark was, they ought to shut down every factory in the country and starve those union fellows until they learned to be glad of the chance to earn $2 a day for 12 hours, 6 days a week, like our pioneer fathers had to do. These are actual quotes. The teaching of the great kahuna, Jesus, was that there must be love and mercy in our dealings with others, and even our thoughts of them. Any attitude of mind that denies compassion to others is almost certain to be accompanied by a sense of guilt or unworthiness in the low self, even if it is deeply hidden. Almost all of us have had some early grounding in fair play and common decency, and where the conscious mind flouts it, there will be conflict with the low self, in which it is ingrained because it belongs to the earliest memories. In almost every case which came to our attention, there were physical ills which seemed to defy all medical or prayer aid. The matter of making amends for hurts done others was a basic part of the kahuna methods for clearing the path, and we can see the reason for it as we study the low self reactions. One may forget in the rush of a busy day that he spoke irritably or unfairly to wife, child, or employee yesterday. But his low self does not forget the hurt look of the person so addressed. It will not be satisfied until its man has made a forthright and humble apology, erasing all hurt from the injured person. When such amends have not been made in the long time past, the low self still harbors a deep-seated feeling of guilt. When one becomes aware of this, yet does not discover just what person or persons he may have injured, or if the chance for making personal amends has passed, a period of making general amends is necessary. General amends are really physical things done to impress ideas on the low self, physical stimuli. Exerting oneself to do good in an impersonal way and giving of contributions to a good cause until it hurts are excellent ways of appeasing the low self. Sometimes the low self feels that this man deserves punishment for these long past deeds of hurt. Here again, the physical stimulus can be used to advantage by performing a penance, such as fasting, denying oneself his smoking, or other pleasurable habits for a time. Such general amends were prescribed in my own case in Hawaii many years ago, when one of the few surviving kahunas of the time was making me ready to be helped. As I was working hard at the time, she did not impose a complete fast, only going without food or cigarettes until 1 o'clock for 3 days. A contribution was made to the Salvation Army, which did good work locally, and because the low self becomes impressed with the great value of money from its earliest days, such a gift, if large enough to hurt, is very impressive. In my case, my low self was very impressed at the end of the 3rd day that we deserved help from any and all high powers. The help was forthcoming at once, and with jam on the bread. One of the great teachings of Jesus was that direct atonement to one formerly injured could be exchanged for general atonement, in which a sufficiency of good deeds done with a sufficiency of good deeds done, and there balance the score. Inasmuch as ye have done it, a kindly act, unto the least of these, my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Each of us makes his own payment But when we have a deep sense of guilt and cannot make amends directly, as to the one long dead, we may substitute good deeds done for the benefit of those around us. A great truth was proved once more in our HRA testing. There is no royal road to the self, to the high self, the kingdom of heaven. The rich and powerful, like the poor and weak, have to go through the same process of cleansing the inside as well as the outside of the symbolic cup of man. The outside of the cup is the middle self, and its beliefs must be examined and reformed to meet the test of hurtlessness, which is basic in Huna. Let me read that sentence again. The outside of the cup is the middle self, and its beliefs must be examined and reformed to meet the test of hurtlessness, which is basic in Huna. If this repentance or reforming can be carried to the point at which non-hurt becomes positive and can include the sincere desire to help others, to love one's neighbors, even to a small degree, so much the better. The low self is the inside of the cup, and no matter how clean we have made the middle self attitudes, the low self is the inside of the cup, and no matter how clean we have made our middle self attitudes, the prayers will not go through to the high self along the Aka cord if the hidden habitual beliefs and attitudes of the low self are not cleansed or made to conform with those of the middle self. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Habits of thought are very strong, perhaps stronger than such habits as drinking and smoking. The low self is hard to grasp and hold and force into new lines of thought and action. The HRAs had their backsliders, just as all other groups in which a new way is proposed and accepted by the middle self. While the low self is not immediately taken in hand and steady and patient made until its habits of thoughts and belief are corrected, we must be, in quotes, born again in this respect and in this life, not waiting and hoping that we shall automatically evolve and progress in a series of future incarnations. The spiritual gains made here will be carried with us into the life or lives ahead. In the HRA, we searched for a method which could be used by one person alone as a substitute for psychoanalysis, in which a second person must help to locate and remove the outlaw tangles, which are difficult to surface. Attention is fastened for a time on the writing out method popularized by an English layman, E. Pickworth Farrow, Farrow, in his book on the subject, Psychoanalyze Yourself. And it says as a footnote here, International Universities Press, 227 West 13th Street, New York. In his book on the subject, Psychoanalyze Yourself, Mr. Farrow tells us how he failed to get his mental and bodily healing after trying the services of several analysts, none of whom, it appears, were themselves clearly... No, let me just start the sentence again. I've really muddled it. In his book on the subject, Psychoanalyze Yourself, Mr. Farrow tells how he had failed to get mental and bodily healing after trying the services of several analysts, none of whom, it appears, were themselves cleared properly. He had then set to work using a simple method in which he sat for periods of about 15 minutes a day and wrote out whatever came into his thoughts as he let his mind wander. He found that the subconscious slowly responded to his desire that events causing fixations could be recalled and presented before the focus of consciousness so that they could be thought over and thus rationalized and changed to harmless memories. In his book, he reported the slow and steady progress made in this way, one incident after another being recalled, although theretofore entirely forgotten, and his mental and physical ills gradually became healed as a result. A few of the HRAs undertook to test this method and in time were able to make their reports. The results obtained were far from uniform, as might have been expected, since each HRA had his or her own life experiences and resultant fixations with such symptoms as matched them. Outstanding was the fact that when the low self was encouraged to select the thing to be written down, it soon began to push into the mind memories of the past, and as this went forward, there came to be more and more memories of things and conditions long forgotten. Things which had ceased to be of any importance to the conscious self were discovered still to be very important to the low self, and in many cases surprisingly and even laughably so. Old hopes, old ambitions, old fears, affronts, and desires all came to the surface, and the odd part of it was that they came up with such strength and freshness that the HRA was often swept away by them, as he was when they were new and vital to him. The freshness and the power of the revived memories of drives and desires and plans and compulsions were in some cases so strong that things long since given over as proper to drop were on the verge of being taken back to be acted upon. Old schemes for making money, or for reforming politics, or the economics of the world were among the list of things that suddenly returned as seemingly both possible and good to attempt. This tendency of the low self to give back to the bright old memories as well as to the darker ones of fear and sorrow caused me to issue the warning in the HRA bulletin that anyone undertaking the use of the method should see to it that nothing in the way of an unusual action or undertaking or response should be allowed or considered without first laying the matter before a trusted friend who is not caught in the flood of old drives and who, therefore, could point out the fallacy of doing anything about them, of reacting. In one case, an HRH used the writing down method for over 2,000 sittings, going back bit by bit, reviving her old drives until she came at last to the very strong religious drives in her early childhood, although she had long since left the old religious views which had been impressed upon her and gone on to explore the metaphysical lines of thought and the religions of India. She reverted completely to the stage in which she had lingered a short year or two as a girl. Not only did she resign from the HRA as from a heathen organization, but she wrote long letters to convince us that we should give up Huna and go back to the severe dogmatism of the religion of her childhood. On the other hand, some HRAs had better results and were able to avoid being caught in the rushing drives by swiftly re-rationalizing them on the emotional side and removing them from the false glamour or the fear that they contained. Also interspersed with other memories were those of events which had caused physical illnesses later in life. One instance of this was in the case in which an HRA had recalled the long-forgotten fact that when very small, she had been so badly frightened by the big gray spiders which lived in the outhouse that she had put off going into it as long as physically possible, and then with much trepidation. When this memory came back to her and had been subjected to a complete going over from the adult point of view, the old fear melted away, and what was most important, a lifelong trouble with constipation vanished like magic and did not return. Instances like this brought clearly to light the fact that there are many things which the low self will correct without outside aid and quite apart from any action on the middle self or the high self if the fixation causing trouble is removed. But it must also be recorded that in some other cases no results at all were obtained after many hours of using the writing down method. It must be remembered that the HRAs were working from a self-diagnosis as to the depth of their fixations. Few comparatively felt the need of analytical methods. Most were content to re-examine their habits of thought and revise them toward the hurtlessness pattern of Huna. Gradually, this began to take effect as they checked themselves in intolerance towards others, in their own angers and jealousies, and overcoming each time made the course clearer and easier. There came about more peace of mind. Then at last, they were praying with more sensation of contact with the high self. Perhaps the blockings were not all removed. Who knows? At any rate, the high self began to take a hand. The truth of the matter seems to be that when the sufficient clearing of the Aka cord to the high self is accomplished by whatever means, the normal relation between the three selves is automatically reestablished, and the high self hastens to draw the needed mana from the low self and cause the healing and corrections to take place, not only in body but also in mental attitudes and in conditions surrounding the individual. Many things have happened in the experimenters who have had success in getting the slight blockings removed, in which only the intervention and loving guidance of the high self could account for the most miraculous turn of events, which brought happiness and success to replace unhappiness and failure. And that concludes Chapter 19. Chapter 20 is entitled New Light on the Teachings of Jesus. Well, I must say, Chapter 19 seems very practical. So, let me know if you have any success with this. And till soon.